I'll just give a short intro. We haven't met face to face, but as we put on our website, Erik is a lawyer, financial planner, writer, and educator in White Plains, New York. He co-chairs the Westchester Braver Angels Alliance and is a New York Forward Party co-lead and co-liaison to the Braver Angels Network. And so he will let us know tonight what Braver Angels is all about and how nuclear can fit into their message. So Erik, feel free to take it away, man.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for having me here. I should start with a little warning, which is that I'm actually at a hotel with not great Wi-Fi. So one of the things I've tried to do is calling in, and hopefully that will help with the audio portion, in case it gets choppy. The other thing is that I actually have a presentation, but it's saying that screen sharing is disabled. So I don't know if that's something that can be
you can enable that,
activated.
Right?
Yeah, Dietmar, do you have that, or I have the option of reclaiming host?
I fixed it. I think
you fixed it,
right?
Can you do it now, Erik?
Okay, there it is.
Cool.
All right, let's see if this works. You want to see that? Okay. Does everyone see the Becoming Braver Angels?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Okay, great. Like I said, it's a little choppy on my end of the Wi-Fi, so hopefully this will go smoothly. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about is, and the reason I'm talking about Braver Angels is they are just started a new initiative called the Braver Angels Network of basically a lot of different organizations around the country that are committed to this idea of depolarization on different topics. And I think nuclear energy is one of the key examples of an issue that really can benefit depolarization and can help depolarize the country. Because one of the things that we discovered, and I'll talk a little bit more about what Braver Angels is, but in our Braver Angels discussions, is that nuclear was an area where people on the left and the right could come together around. It was the area that the people on the right in our group were most receptive when it comes to dealing with climate change. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Also, I think it's an opportunity to grow nuclear New York, because a lot of people will join Braver Angels. And I'll talk again, I'm going to talk about what it is, but at the end of it, there's like, what do I do now? And especially for people that are interested in climate and energy independence, I think an organization like Nuclear New York could be very appealing. So I will just do a quick overview here of what Braver Angels is. And Jack, thanks for starting that discussion. And then we're going to have a little Q&A. So first of all, the name actually started as Better Angels. And it was from an Abraham Lincoln quote of appealing to the better angels, to our better angels, right? Of trying to bridge divides. Unfortunately, of course, that didn't work because it led to a civil war. And we don't want to see that kind of thing happen again. And what we're really seeing is a rise of polarization. And if you're like me, you've probably seen the effects of this in terms of your own lives, of people sometimes even losing friendships, having trouble talking to family members that are on the other side of the political divide, and really just causing a lot of stress and division in our society. And so Braver Angels, the whole point of Braver Angels is to try to bridge those divides and to depolarize society. So when we're talking about polarization, there's different types of polarization. One type of polarization is just disagreements. And having really big disagreements on issues. And that's not necessarily what Braver Angels is trying to change. What Braver Angels is actually focused on is what's called effective polarization. And effective polarization is not about what you believe in terms of the issues and policies, it's what you believe about each other. And so what you're seeing is that, and this is a lot of polling data on this, showing that people's views of their own party has stayed the same or improved, while their views of people in the other party has disintegrated. And you see this in animosity, contempt, distrust, where it's really becoming very personal, right? So it's one thing if you just disagree with someone, it's another thing if you actually dislike people on the other side. And so it really makes it hard for people to even listen to each other when they don't respect each other. And what you also find is people, and there's polling data to back this up, are more willing to do almost anything just to defeat the other party because there's, again, so much hostility. And you find people more willing to bend or even break rules, which is obviously not good for our democracy, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. Also, people are unwilling to admit few, if any, faults. And we know there is nothing, no side is perfect, and it's hard to make progress. We know this in our own lives if we're not willing to admit, what our weaknesses are and try to work on improving that. So this is an interesting example of effective polarization, the percentage of people who would be unhappy if a child married outside their party in 1960, because it's pretty low. In 2018, those numbers were significantly higher among both Democrats and Republicans. So that's just like one anecdotal example. The good news is that when you get people talking, they find that they have more in common than they think. And polling shows this. When you ask people what the other side thinks, they have a much more negative view. Let's put it this way: the other side is usually not as extreme as people think. In other words, Democrats think Republicans have more extreme positions than they do, and Republicans think Democrats have more extreme positions they do. And there's actually more commonality than they realize once they start talking. So what Braver Angels does is brings Americans together, to bridge that divide and try to understand the other side's, point of view. The goal here is to engage, with people who we disagree with and try to see where we can find common ground. So it's not necessarily trying to convince the other side, it's trying to find areas where you already can agree. And this is a key thing about Braver Angels in everything that we do. Red and blue, so right and left, have to be equally represented so that no side feels like they're being ganged up on. And we strive to be an organization that reflects the country, right? So that's, again, we don't want to be a conservative or a liberal organization. The core values are respecting each other, listening to the other side, having humility that we could be wrong, right? Or we could have weaknesses, being honest about our positions, and taking responsibility for our democracy and not just blaming other people for our problems. And the goal here is to building, a house united, as Lincoln said, right? Now, as Jack pointed out, this did start with a group of concerned citizens, equal number of Democrats and Republicans right after the 2016 election that decided to meet and have a discussion because that election was so divisive, right? And then they started a bus tour, as he pointed out, and really started expanding the conversation around the country. I'm going to skip the video for time, and also I don't think it's going to play well over this Wi-Fi. So this is the timeline of the organization. The first meeting was in 2016, right after the election, really started growing. The bus tour was in 2017. Then it became more formal in terms of organization and expansion. 2020, we saw some explosive growth around that election. And the profile has been increasing in the media. And then 2022, we started this new initiative of Braver Politics that I'll talk about. So the idea here is to grow in terms of our understanding of each other, to pair up. We do a lot of activities where we'll have people from different parties or different generations or rural and urban or across ethnic divides to talk and learn from each other and to experience what that's like to actually talk to someone from the other side in a civil and understanding manner. We do that partly through workshops. The red-blue workshop is our basic introductory workshop, and then which is trying to dispel myths and having each side talk to each other. And then common ground workshops are focused on particular topics. So for example, you could do a common ground one on energy, where just do a dive, just talking about energy and looking for where both sides can agree. And then there's skills training workshops and how to talk to the other side, the type of language that you can use that doesn't, trigger, division, family and politics, how do you cross family, conversations about race across ethnic divisions, one-on-one conversations. We also have Braver Angels debates, And we have a lot of other things, movie screenings and other types of social activities. And so the results, and we've actually, found there's been some studies on this to show that it does reduce effective polarization. I can tell you that in our own meetings, people have really been shocked by finding out that, when you actually meet real people on the other side, they're, quote, not as bad as people think. 70 to 80% of people say they have a better understanding of the side and have more positive attitudes of the other side. 85% feel less estranged and angry, 87% gain significant understanding, 91% the areas of commonality. And there was an academic study, so it's not just internal, of 7 different Braver Angels workshops and groups that showed similar results. But now I do want to reiterate, the goal is not to change people's views. It's not to try to pull everyone into the middle or pull everyone to the center. There are people in Braver Angels across the entire political spectrum, and they are not necessarily going to change, right? We have people that are socialists, we have people on the far right, and that's okay. Everybody's welcomed. You're not expected to become a moderate or a centrist. That's not the purpose of Braver Angels. The purpose is to change the views of each other. And so you don't have as much of this hate and animosity. And then once you do, then perhaps you can find more collaborative solutions to problems, potentially. At least opens the door for that possibility. Again, finding common ground. Not necessarily, again, changing positions, although I will say that sometimes happens, but looking for those opportunities where people can overlap. And at the minimum, even if you don't find common ground, even if the whole benefit is just learning skills so that you can talk to your uncle on Thanksgiving without having a fight break out, or your coworkers, that itself is a huge benefit that people find. Recognizing others as worthy of respect, establishing ways to work together, even finding friendships across the divide. There are also special groups within Braver Angels to focus on areas where we, have a little trouble, to be honest, finding representation. As you may have noticed in that first photo, it was almost an all-white group. It tends to attract a lot of professionals, and even though the group needs to be split, blue and red, there's generally more blues or people interested, and so in order to grow, to include more of those blues, we also always trying to find more red to match them. And so there are organizations within Braver Angels trying to expand people of color, more working people, and more people on the red. Okay, so again, the actual events are always split 50-50, but sometimes, honestly, blue people can't get into a lot of these sessions because there are too many blues and not enough red. That's what that's about. So again, try to imagine, a national union, of people giving, respect to each other, stronger relationships, finding out what actually works instead of just fighting. And just to talk about what Braver Angels is planning to do going forward, scaling, we're going through a lot of growth right now. Strategic partnerships, which is what the Braver Network is about, which I'll talk about in a moment. Influence institutions, and there's going to be a national convention in July, from July 5th through 8th in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now, Braver Politics is where Braver Angels is trying to actually get more involved in real politics, working with the legislators and their staff, again, to help people bridge these divides, trying to increase trust, and so people can work with each other, connecting citizens. And you can see there's a Democrat and Republican member of Congress who are very involved with Braver Angels. So if you want to learn more about this, you could, if you want to subscribe to our email list, braverangels.org/subscribe, or you can text BA to 66866. And then the goal again is, I love this quote from Lincoln: "Do not like that man, I must get to know him better." Really is that what we're striving to do. So what I want to do now that I've done that is talk a little bit about what the Braver Network is. That was the impetus behind me contacting you guys. So this is brand new. It's a new initiative to try to build a movement beyond what Braver Angels can do on its own. And the Braver Network, first of all, I want to say a few things right off the bat in case you're worried about this. There are no fees to join the Braver Network. There are no meetings you need to attend. There's practically nothing you need to do. And you're not committing to supporting any positions or any policies or anything like that. Really, it's just organizations that care about this concept of polarization or depolarization. And you could see some of the examples here of the groups that have joined so far. One example of a group that some of you may already be members of is the Citizens Climate Lobby, because that's also a climate change group. But there's organizations here across all different types of issues that focus on different things. You can see there's Niskanen Center's a think tank. You have No Labels, One American Movement. The Forward Party in many states has joined. Lots of different types of organizations. The Concord Coalition focuses on deficit reduction. I actually also help recruit a lot of these organizations. I think like 6 or 7 of them that I'm involved with as well. And any organization that joins, the members, if they want to join Braver Angels, can join for free. Usually it's just $5 a month. So there's no $5 a month fee. If you are part of an organization, so if Nuclear New York was to join, anyone who wanted to be involved in Braver Angels could be a free member. So you could attend the workshops and these other things. You could also send delegates if you want to you're not required, but you can, to the convention, and which I think is a great networking opportunity, to meet people who also might be interested in joining Nuclear New York, because these are all people that are looking for solutions. Because like I said, one of the things that you find is when people have these discussions, it's like, what next? What do I do now? And again, I'll tell you, in our own group, climate change is one of the topics that we talked about. And at the time, to be honest with you, I was kind of talking to people more about Citizens Climate Lobby, because that was a group that I was involved with. But, and actually, I don't think I even knew about Nuclear New York at the time, but nuclear energy was the #1 area of overlap that we found common ground. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for your group, particularly, to just grow your membership through that. So that's it. I told you it'd be a really quick, short, sweet talk about, and I just want to see what kind of questions you guys have.
Well, thank you very much. That was an awesome presentation, and I think that resonates with all of us. But I see that my partner Dietmar has politely raised his hand, and I've blocked him. So we need to compromise on our routine here. So I'll give him the mic.
Erik, if you want to stop the screen sharing, then we can all see each other. That would be good. I have 2 questions. One is simple. How are you guys getting funded? It's wonderful for us to be able to join for free, but you obviously have a lot of program going on and events and travel expenses. So that would be interesting. Then a more complicated question. Yes, I do agree that America suffers from the division, from the polarization, and it's wonderful that you're working on bridging that and kind of make people listen to one another again. I do observe, however, that there are some groups that are driving this. I have the feeling it's not just the rules of the game, like with our 2-party system and the primaries, but that there are groups that are taking advantage of it, that are driving it. For example, we did have an pure energy focused discussion, climate energy focused discussion in New York State, where we had the Climate Action Council that was put together, like many facets of life in New York State, to discuss how the state can reach the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019. And instead of discussing purely energy and emissions, it then also had to discuss the social justice issues, which I know I'm more on the left side, and so it didn't write me that hard, but I know that for folks like Bill, for example, it made it really difficult to engage in this party discourse and follow this in like a focused focusing on the issues, because there was suddenly people were interested in bringing in this baggage of our political discourse and making this discussion that should have been about climate and emissions and energy so much more difficult. So maybe can you explain a little bit who are the actors beyond the institutional ground rules that are seeking to benefit and who are driving this on that you're basically that are the counter actors of your work?
Okay, so the funding is mostly through membership fees. People can also donate more than the $5 a month. I don't know that there's really a lot of money, to be honest, spent by the organization, because almost everybody I've ever interacted with is a volunteer, the entire leadership. There might be people at the national level that are paid staff, but it's not something that costs a lot of money. I mean, we meet in order, we don't rent space. Like the meetings that we've had, we've always been able to find places to do it where people have donated. Like you have a member that has a space in their business or at their church or in their apartment building. So I don't know that it's a very expensive organization. It's not like you're spending money on candidates, right? You're not running campaigns. I don't even know that there's much of a marketing campaign. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that's part of the Braver Network approach. This is also, let's be honest, it's a way for Braver Angels to grow, because you have all these organizations. Look at now, I'm talking to you all. And so some people will end up, joining and donating. So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement there. In terms of your second question of, try to help me understand the question more. You said who's trying to cause the division? You were talking about like people inserting social justice issues, right? In terms of a discussion of energy and climate. And so you're saying, how do you prevent that? Is that what the question?
No, can you explain? Is that a thing? Is that part of the drive? And can you identify the drivers of this? Like, help me understand. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from, but why is it beneficial? And how do people deploy division in order to advance their agenda? And I'm not even sure what that is, that agenda that you're achieving with polarization. Is polarization for some people a goal in itself, an end in itself, or is there something else there? Maybe I should read a book about that, and I'm sure there are very smart books out there, and maybe I'm driving this in the wrong direction, but
This is a very divisive question, in my
no.
opinion. I mean, I think in some ways, just
so,
running for office, you're forced to divide yourself from your opponent and maybe like make that division look bigger than it actually is. I don't know if that's a problem.
yeah, so this is where I think it's important to, and maybe I went over it too fast, like the different types of polarization. So there is like a policy polarization. I think that's a separate issue. That's where people just have really different views on politics and policy. But what Braver Angels is really focused on is this affective polarization, which is more about how you feel about the other side as people. So you could have two people that have very different views on issues, but respect each other and even like each other. And the reason I'm saying that is because that's almost the first step to start, at least so that you can even talk and listen to each other, so that you can find common ground. And maybe even find a way to compromise and to work together. That's not guaranteed. That's not even what Braver Angels is trying to do. But it's like, it's hard to get there if you hate the other person. So like, let me try to give an example from your organization standpoint, right? So if I am someone, I'm going to stereotype for a moment, so I don't want to offend anyone. But let's say I'm someone who's a far left anti-nuclear activist. So I may not even listen to the argument for nuclear, because in my head, I may think they're evil. Like, they just want to, make money on nuclear, and they don't care about the dangers. And so if I have an idea that the people that are pro-nuclear are like these horrible people, I may not even listen to the argument. So if I have this sense, if I can even just sit down and have a conversation and find out, oh, wow, okay, this person actually does care also about the environment. And, you know, they've had these experiences and they're not like a horrible person, then maybe I'll be more open to listening to the arguments for nuclear energy. It doesn't guarantee that I will be convinced, but it opens the door. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Because Braver Angels is not taking any positions on any topics at all. They're not, it's not trying to promote anything policy-wise. It's just trying to get people to talk to each other in a respectful and civil manner. Like literally, that's it. I'm involved in other organizations that are trying to put policy. That's not what Braver Angels.
I have so many questions to ask, and I see Keith has also politely raised his hand, and I guess refused to raise my hand. So we'll go to Keith. He deserves it.
For being polite, I usually don't raise my hand. I usually interject. So I'm getting rewarded for good behavior, I guess. First, I just want to say, Eric Carter, I really think this is a beautiful thing you all are doing. Frankly, I do. And I also would say that and I've said this actually every time I've talked about Nuclear New York, that I'm very grateful to be part of an organization where people from a wide, diverse realm of the political spectrum have come together and working very effectively together. I mean, we literally, I think, are an example of what you're talking about. You know, we got people on the far right, on the far left, and people in between, and we all respect each other because there is that baseline of respect, and that I think is our strength. So again, I think whatever we can do in all realms of life to treat each other that way is going to be important. But I guess one question I wanted to ask, and I almost started to ask Jack this too right before you came on, Eric, is because he was telling us about his history, and he was an attorney, and he got into, I guess, moderation and conflict resolution. And I guess my question is, you kind of almost have to be a psychologist or something to be effective in this, understand the way people think and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, so it was, I believe it was started by like marriage counseling people who worked in marriage counseling and therapy and things like that. And so they were taking a lot of what they knew about how do you get a couple to talk to each other and apply that to politics. That's kind of like the origin behind it. So you're correct in that way. So a lot of the principles that they talk about in the workshops are based on that approach.
Well, there was a book. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't raise my hand.
Go ahead. Go for it.
There was a book by somebody, might have been David Brooks, called Love Your Enemies. And it talked about how American politics has a contempt problem, that the two sides have such contempt for each other. And like marriage, you were talking about marriage counselors, and one sign that a marriage counselor uses to tell that a marriage is getting beyond hope is if the two parties really have contempt for each other.
Yeah.
You know, there was a very conservative Supreme Court justice, and he was like close buddies with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They'd go to the opera together. And when he died, Ruth was especially devastated compared to all the other, even though he was the leading conservative justice at the time.
Scalia.
Yep, Scalia and
yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good example of where you could have political polarization without effective polarization. Like that's a perfect example.
Just to dovetail on that, I got a whole list here, but what do you think is the best way to introduce a hot button issue to someone who does not want to hear any dissident opinions from their own? And I noticed in your presentation, you talked about maybe having a workshop to do with language that wasn't triggering, but like, you know, with a certain kind of person who has triggers everywhere, it's like you're walking on, you know, landmines in any direction. So like, is there like a kind of first step, like a prerequisite to even like talking that you should take?
Yeah, and so that's actually one of the workshops that goes through that. I don't teach that workshop, so I'm probably not the best person to give you a really good sense of that. But a lot of it comes through even talking in the group and finding out. And it's interesting when you have these conversations, someone will say something and by the way, it's about equal on both sides. Someone will say that word, when you say that word, it's very alienating to me. And it's interesting because it'll be a word that you will think is totally innocuous. And like I said, it is about 50-50 in my experience.
What
and it'll
words
be interesting
offend
just to hear.
conservatives? What I don't have the
Um,
impression it's 50-50 at
Well,
all.
okay. No, here's an example, because we recently were at this thing and someone was, even something like using the word diversity and equity, because because it was used in a way that was like, obviously this is something we all want. And to the people, there was like one or two people in that group on the conservative side that just said, once you start using those words, diversity, equity, you're losing me, kind of thing. And so there was that created a whole conversation about what does that word mean to you. So that was like an example.
I see. Okay.
And
one thing I forgot to mention.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh yeah, just one quick thing. Is anyone here from the Westchester area? Do you have members in Westchester? No? Okay. Then it doesn't apply.
Sorry,
We know people in
not
West.
here right now.
Yeah, we have people on our mailing list, like our broader membership, who live in Westchester. So we can relay a message if you would like.
And
well,
there's a lot of interesting things happening in Westchester. So I'm interested in what you were about to say.
Well, what I've started doing, and it was not even part of this, but I think I'm going to fold it in, is getting people together from different organizations in Westchester to figure out how we can work together, and doing some joint events and things like that. And I was actually thinking of making that part of a Braver Network thing. And I just talked to people in Braver Angels at the national level, and they were very intrigued by this. Like, oh, we didn't even think about that, having these local meetings and affiliations. And so if there was someone to represent Nuclear New York in Westchester, that would be great.
Yeah, well, we can
network.
Perhaps you can meet some people.
Well, I mean, the reason I found it interesting is because, I mean, Westchester's up toward that area where you have Indian Point, which is the hot button.
Yes.
As it relates to nuclear, and especially right now with decommissioning. So it's interesting.
One thing that we've done in our group, we have very, very slowly grown in the last couple of years, and we've given a lot of presentations, and some of us have gone to various climate marches and engaged with other people. And I feel like we often find that, we give these nice presentations to people who are already pretty warm to nuclear, or we show up in some, kind of enemy territory where people are screaming and don't want us there. I like the idea of like fostering a respectful debate. And even like, you're implying you would even like choose to make it 50-50. So it's not like one side could shout down the other easily and that sort of stuff. So I'm wondering, what's the role of discussion versus debate, and does one lead to another in order, or how do you feel about that?
I think they both have their place. I think they're both really helpful and useful. And we haven't actually, at our local group, we're about to actually, it's funny, just today, I got an email of talking about setting up a debate, and we are trying to choose a topic. So heck, if you want to do something nuclear related, maybe we could do that. But we have never done a debate. We've only done discussions so far. But I know other groups have done debates. And, sometimes they draw different audiences. And I think from a nuclear point of view, to your point, I think any exposure you can get to people that might be in the middle on the topic would be helpful. That's what I would imagine would be the case.
Yeah,
what's the philosophy of going with a debate? Because I mean, to me, a debate is where you have a winner and a loser, which is kind of the antithesis of finding common ground, right? What's the thought behind with having debates?
I think it's an opportunity I think what we're really trying to do is, finding common ground is one thing out of many, right, that Braver Angels tries to do. but at the minimum, before you even get that, is just to listen to the other. That's what we're really trying to do, is to have people listen and understand each other. So even if you don't find common ground, if people just listen to each other, that's a win. So if there is a debate and people are civil and they learn and what they come away with it, even if they don't change their position, but maybe they're like, you know what, the other side isn't as bad as I thought, that's a win, right? Now, it's even better if you can find common ground, but I don't think that's a necessary thing. The other thing that's interesting that they found is conservatives are actually more prefer the debate format, and liberals prefer the discussion. Now, of course, there's always exceptions to that. That's just what they found statistically. So you tend to just draw, more different interests, I guess.
I think Jack has his hand up.
Yeah, if Eric Carter doesn't mind, let me just give you my perspective from my observations as a moderator in Braver Angels. Eric is right. The objective is not to prevail necessarily on any issue one way or the other, and it's not to interject an agenda on any particular subject. The Braver Angels suite of programs includes, as he said, there are workshops, there are debates, there are these deep dives on a subject. The workshops in particular are really designed to teach transferable skills. So in other words, the basic one is called the depolarizing within. And it basically asks you to think about what others, how others may view you. Okay, that's the whole purpose of it, and it's red and blue. And so the red people are thinking about, well, how does a blue person perceive me? The blue people are saying, how does a red person perceive me? And there's a bunch of exercises that are structured. These workshops are relatively highly structured to go through experiences that inform you about things that may not be in the front of your mind. When I taught my conflict resolution class, the very first thing I said in my first class was, I'm going to say a lot of things, and not much of it is rocket science. A lot of it are things that as soon as I say it, you say, of course, that's right. Or of course, I can think that. But the problem is those are not at the front of your mind, and you don't think about them in an organized way. And so that's a little bit about what Braver Angels does. It calls to the forefront of your mind some of these things that will allow you to engage with somebody who disagrees with you or has a different perspective from you, and walk away from it saying, all right, I can respect that person. I may not agree with them, but I can respect that person. And these skills are transferable. You could use them in nuclear New York engagements. You can use them in other aspects of your life. I mean, these are just sort of generic skills that help to be able to engage with other people in a constructive way. That's the basic point of it. When you get into a debate, the debate is more about the process. They insist that you direct your question to a moderator versus yelling back and forth at the person that you're debating with, etc. So it's all about a process that says at the end of it, we may never come any closer than we were at the beginning to agreeing about anything, but at the end you can say, all right, I respect that person. I understand more about them. I've listened to what they've said. I understand more about them. I understand maybe more about what they're coming from. I disagree with it, but I respect. That's the end product of what Braver Angels is trying to do. And most of the folks, including many of the moderators, are not professional social workers or mediators or I happen to be one, but most of them are not, and it's really about having them go through and learn it themselves, and then sort of pass it on to others and spread the process that way.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Jack. So I have never actually attended that depolarizing yourself workshop, so thank you for that insight on that one. And I'm also not a moderator, so you probably have more experience in actually running these things than certainly than I do.
Yeah, a couple of other workshops are a red person in a blue community, or a blue person in a red community. That's another pair of workshops, and it sort of gives you some skills about how to engage in that scenario.
I could use some of that. I have another question. Do you, in your experience, and this is kind of a blanket thing, so feel free to answer it however you want, but do you think that young people today are more partisan than old people, or that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that it's more the older generation that are more stuck in their ways, or do you think there's not even a pattern?
So what the data shows is that most people form their political identity around their maybe late teenagers, but more likely early to mid 20s. And then it doesn't change that much. So I know there's the whole stereotype of people becoming more conservative as they get older. There's a little bit of truth to that, but it's actually, if you look at it, it's more generational. So depending on what was happening when one generation was coming of age, they tend to stay that way. So like the young people coming up under Reagan, or that generation today is still a very Republican generation. The young people that came up under the late Bush years, beginning of Obama years, is a very liberal one. So whatever is happening during those formative years tends to really influence how people view politics, and then it kind of gets set. So I do think they are probably less, because I think polarized in the sense that they're more open-minded, but it's a good time to reach people because they're more fluid, I think, in their opinions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I might raise my hand officially. I can't do this. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can I come in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, by the way. That's very good. I come from a situation where what I observe is the people, the older they get, they seem to get more polarized. And with my research, and I'm actually people who are anti-nuclear, but they are lovely people. They often have done great things in their life, and to marches and things like that, or that fought against the nuclear bomb. Great, and they went through all these fights, and now they have to change. It is like ingrained. They walk the streets, and so they haven't. So I see them as friends at the moment, or not friends exactly, but they are like time people of my time, and I feel a certain kinship with them in a sense. But we are on the other side, and not on the other side really. But I just more of a missionary about this. I believe in what I do, and I try to sell to them my idea. It is not actually, that's the crudest way to put it, actually, to sell them. But I said, this is really good stuff. And this is sometimes hard for people who are in the 60s or 70s, who have gone through a whole rigmarole to fight this or to fight that. And it's hard to give up their opinions. Or it is not an opinion, it is sometimes it has been a battle for life, the reason for existence, and I have myself that a little bit. So I'm getting more and more appreciative of my conservative friends here in nuclear New York, who contribute to my expanding wisdom. But I usually, see also the people who oppose me. I hate polarization, either or question. What drives you in either or, and I try to stay away and get around that. And it is somewhat of an old-fashioned position. So you don't make a decision. But I hate to get into an either-or situation with anybody, and that is some people might consider uncommitted. So when I'm in this socialist, I'm a Quaker. So I believe in a higher power. So if I'm in the Quakers, I say, well, we should talk about nuclear power. And think about the atomic bomb, a little bit more, and so on and so on. So it is indeed, I try to, exactly how I do it, but I have some. I'm not always successful though. That's true. But I try to go to the back of demonstrations where for very anti-nuclear organized by big anti-nuclear organizations, and just handing out the pamphlets and having conversations with people like that is very insightful. I think it is more of like trying to have a conversation and bringing in some facts, if you can do that, if you have the time to do that. So it's just makes success, I guess. But yeah, I'm definitely on the way. I'm definitely on the same track. I'm really trying to know more how Better Angels is doing. The more we can definitely use more of that stuff, because the polarization is really getting out of hand, and it's not so much in people as into mass media. I find it, or radios and radio talk shows, and yeah, they have like a very polarizing effect, and so that is what I see actually, and it would be nice to deal with that in a better way. So thank you for being here.
Just to dovetail off that, thank you for that, Paul, and we appreciate you here. Before this presentation, I was kind of thinking of questions to ask, and I was thinking about, oh, what's the root of bipartisanship, as Paul was saying, and like, or some people make it more polarizing. And when I go on my grumpy old man kind of rants in New York, I say, oh, everybody here, they just worship celebrities and they parrot headlines, and nobody has a thought for anything. No one has any courage. No one has any integrity or intellectual curiosity. Well, my wife says, okay, calm down, stop talking. Da, da. And I was thinking, what is the best way to attack this? And is it kind of rooted in kind of early education of civics education of the Constitution, of Federalist Papers? Or is it, focusing on reason, like logic, empiricism, and separating primary from secondary sources, and Occam's razor, and not having double standards and things like this? But then in your presentation, you talked about these kind of traditional virtues of, I think, respect, humility, honesty, responsible citizenship. Like maybe that's the best way to really, go kindergarten level, like the root of this that we find in different world religions and kind of different Stoic philosophies and things. So I was curious if that comes up a lot, of like, okay, let's start from square one of especially humility in today's age, like such an important thing that people just totally forget.
Yes, in my experience, the most important thing is just getting to see people as people. So when this group of organizations that I got together, we all went, so we had dinner together, and just everyone kind of shared how they got involved in their own particular issue in their own organization. And it was just a really wonderful thing. It was about 50-50 people that affiliate more on the left and the right. And it was actually a coincidence. I didn't even try to work out that way. And it was interesting to me because there was so much bonding going on, that the liberals were much more receptive to the conservatives' point of view, and the conservatives to the liberals, because they're just even talking on a human level was really helpful. And I really think it also makes a difference doing it face to face. I'm saying that as we're talking over Zoom here, but I think there is a place for Zoom, and I do a lot of Zoom meetings too, but there is, I think, also something special about meeting face to face as well, as ways of really just seeing each other as people. And I think that's what those traditional virtues that you're talking about are trying to do.
Nice.
I don't know if I'm frozen. It keeps my video keeps freezing, but I guess the audio is not, so that's good.
Yeah, audio is good. Dietmar, you had your hand up?
Thank you. I was thinking, I want to know what happens there if you talk to a group and you have these seminars. Maybe Jack, you can explain it a little bit, or how do people become braver angels? Do they get their own epiphany, or is that a gradual process and then they join you? Or do you actually reach out to really polarized people and then you explain your case, and then they're like, a bulb goes off and they're like, oh, now I get it, and that changes them, or their viewpoint on polarization, and how their responsibility in it to change it, to make it better? Or is that is what you achieve with your seminars and the mentoring, I guess, or discussions, are people changing gradually? Is it like a habit that they have to work on, a pattern, like an addiction of thinking in a polarized way, and then they have to train to get out of certain patterns? How does this process that you want to trigger in Americans' heads work? Is that gradual, or is that like an insight that you have to communicate?
I think it depends on the person. I mean, there's certainly people who have a light bulb moment just doing one workshop, right? They come to a workshop and they have a light bulb moment. There's other people that it's a process. Sometimes the most useful is doing the one-on-ones, for example. When you pair up with one person and you meet over lunch or dinner or drinks or whatever it may be, and they have, there's a structure to these things, and there's different formats that you can use. So yeah, I don't know how to, I don't want to, give a blanket, how it works. I mean, Jack, maybe you can comment on that. You might have even more of a sense of it than I do, of what proportion, I guess, of people, have one light bulb moment versus more of a gradual thing.
Well, my observation, again, from a couple of workshops that I did, was, well, I'll tell you my story. I mean, I practiced this stuff when I was in academia around these kinds of issues about how you resolve conflict and how you practice active listening skills. That's another big thing in Braver Angels, practicing active listening skills and things of that sort. I was new to Florida. My wife and I had just moved down there from Pennsylvania, and I was looking for something to do. And so I became aware of a workshop that was being offered by Braver Angels, and I went just to go check it out. And so the folks who were there, there were some that didn't stay. It was an all-day workshop. It went like 10 to 3. There were folks who showed up who had a misperception of what it was going to be about and left within an hour because they wanted to argue. They wanted a debate. They wanted to sort of, resolve Trump versus non-Trump issues, right? Something like that, as an example. And when they found out that was not what the day was about, they left. There were other people, and as part of the sort of introductions and the getting to know, they said, we are disturbed by what's going on in the country. We are afraid of what's going on in the country in terms of our democracy. We're looking for some solution that we can bring home and that we can actually think about and participate about. And then they went through the process. And for the majority of them, and me included, because it was a little bit of a different way of doing it than I would have done it, a majority of them said, yeah, this makes sense. This all makes sense. And like I said, from what I used to tell my classes, it's not rocket science. It's bringing to the forefront of your thought process things that you just don't have the consciousness to think about routinely or think about them in an organized way. And so there were a lot of people that left that day thinking, yeah, this all made sense. And I don't have the statistics. I don't know how many of them said I'll pay. I think in the early days it was $1 a month, not $5 a month. So inflation, I guess. But I don't know how many of them decided to do that. But on the other hand, then COVID, I went right before COVID reared its ugly head. And a lot of those folks who were at that first workshop in Naples, Florida, ended up in a Zoom group together. It was sort of a self-organizing Zoom group, and continue to have these discussions, and in their own way, not with a Braver Angels moderator involved. They just became people who said we enjoy exchanging views with each other, and whether you agree or disagree. I'm a conservative, and a lot of these folks are not. And so so that's the way it evolved. And Erik, you have an alliance. We have been trying like hell to have an alliance in Southwest Florida, and COVID put a big dent in our efforts there. We're going to probably resuscitate that now that we're back out and about. But that's kind of the way it evolves. But like I said, for the most part, if you're not interested in having a debate about LGBTQ rights. If you're just interested in sort of a self-improvement opportunity, there are a suite of workshops that you could go through, and they just sort of suggest to you skills that are frankly transferable to just about anything you do in your life when you encounter other people.
Yeah, let me just to clarify what is driving me to do this. So my goal is not to sell Braver Angels. Well, if some of you are interested in joining, I think that's great. My motivation is a little different. My motivation is that when I was in a Braver Angels Alliance, like I said, we would talk about topics and then people would be like, what do I do next? And then I would say, oh, do you know about this organization? And people would be like, no, I've never heard of it. What about this group? I've never heard of it. And then I realized, wouldn't it be wonderful for these organizations to actually like get to know each other and work together? And when I say this, for example, there's groups that work on fiscal responsibility. There's work groups that work on political reform. There's work, and these are all causes I believe in, by the way. I'm going to put my cards out there on the table. And I'm trying to help this Nuclear New York get more exposure to people who might want to get involved in this issue. Just like I'm trying to get these other organizations to get more exposure. So that's where I see a lot of synergy. And that's why we're trying to do this thing in Westchester, where what we're going to do is we're going to have joint events. And so we'll have speakers, we'll have other things. And this way, if you have a pro-nuclear, this will get all these people that are interested in political reform and interested in fiscal responsibility to maybe go to a talk about nuclear energy that they would normally never go to, right? Because they're not even thinking about that issue. So they're not your enemies and they're not people that are the choir you'd be singing to. But it's the same thing. I want to cross-pollinate. That's what I'm trying to achieve. And when I saw, that was in my head before Braver Network. So then when I saw Braver Angels create the Braver Network, oh, well, this gives me a vehicle, to do that. So I just wanted to say that if you all want to get involved with Braver Angels, that's awesome. But that's not even the goal. My goal, I want Nuclear New York to get exposure, I think, to all these the members of these different organizations, including Braver Angels, because I do believe strongly in nuclear energy. Just like I believe in some of these, I believe in a carbon tax, that's climate change. I believe in ranked choice voting. So, and maybe you all do or don't, but that's okay. And I think if we can just get people at least talking to one another, then I think we all have the potential to grow these different causes, right? So that's the angle I'm coming at. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not here to sell Braver Angel.
Well, too late.
I
sold it,
I am
think.
here to sell the network.
Done very well.
Yeah, I am selling the network because I think it's a great networking opportunity with literally no cost. There's no downside. Even just having your name on the website is publicity. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that what you're saying resonates with most of us very, very much. So we'll definitely do something with you in the future. I got one other question for you. You have said that in your, and I'm not, I know you don't have a survey right in front of you, but in your experience, you think that nuclear has like the strongest bipartisan potential in the country right now at this moment. Are there any other issues like your top three where you think like, oh, these are actually some things that I think people would come together on more, or is nuclear the only one?
Yeah, so there were three that, now when I say this is not based on national polling, this is just based on the discussion in our groups, local groups. The biggest source of agreement was actually political reform because there wasn't a single person who didn't think that was important.
What does that mean?
Trying to make the political, things like ranked choice voting, things to open up the political process, open primaries, make it easier to have more parties. One of the feelings people had is just having two choices is not good. And also that the political system itself drives polarization and makes it hard to find compromise. That was the number one. Number two was nuclear. That was the second one. Because that was an area that almost everybody agreed on, because we got into a discussion about climate. The third issue, this was, maybe 60%, I don't know, I'm making up a number. I would say majority. It was an interesting one where it said we need to get beyond fighting about identity, about race and gender, and focus more on economics. That was an interesting thing. So it's like we're instead of fighting about, the different, the feeling among a lot of the groups was that these identity issues are just dividing people unnecessarily, and that that the real division was an economic division, and helping people, to have more economic opportunity and mobility is what the focus should be. And there was more agreement about that, and that instead we're all fighting about these identity issues. So that's actually another group I'm involved with called FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, which is working on trying to bridge these cultural war issues, which I think is also really important.
Interesting. Wow. Well, do we have any
all
more
of those
questions for Erik? We don't want to hold you hostage all night, but that was a hell of a presentation.
No,
and everything you do sounds very interesting, at the very least, and something that we might want to get very much involved with.
Agree.
No, this is great. I hope to attend more of your meetings. I've been on your mailing list for a long time, but I feel like I'm over involved because I'm involved in all the organizations I've been talking about. And it for whatever reason, I think maybe the times weren't working for me, but I just love this.
I guess I wanted to ask you, I don't recall you saying, what drove you to become part of this Braver Angels initiative? Erik.
That's a good question. So just a little bit maybe about my political background. I was a Republican for most of my life. I was very active in the Republican Party until 2016. I left the Republican Party because of climate. I became very convinced that climate change is one of the big issues of our time. And I saw, I went from John McCain as being a champion of fighting climate to Mitt Romney, who was kind of ambiguous on it, to Donald Trump, who thought it was, a conspiracy from China. And so I left the Republican Party and I was trying to find a political home. And so I was in that kind of politically homeless phase when I saw something. It was actually clever marketing that they were doing in Westchester, where they put something, I don't even remember where it was, maybe it was Meetup, and it said something about a new type of Republican or something. And at the time I was still kind of a Republican, but it was kind of saying, and the reason they were doing that is they needed more Republicans to have it balanced. So to do a workshop. So then I joined, and then I guess that's how I joined. Because part of it was I felt like I wanted to meet other people who felt like this division. So this is where I have to differentiate myself from Braver Angels. So Braver Angels, like I said, is focused purely on effective polarization. I think that's super important. Personally, I would also like to help bridge some of these policy polarizations. Like, I'm really interested on how we can find areas where we can get, some of the best of both sides. That's like my passion. So that's what got me interested, because I just wanted to meet other people who might be interested in the same thing. And an example of that, to me, would be pairing a carbon tax with support for nuclear energy. Because both of those individually have some support across party lines. The carbon tax tends to be a little bit more popular on the left. Nuclear energy, I think, is probably still more popular on the right. And I think those two things actually work well together, because as you develop nuclear energy, as there's more nuclear power, you develop more of a constituency to pass a carbon tax, because you're going to have more people invested in nuclear energy, and now coal and oil are the competitors. But I still think you're going to need a carbon tax to supplement nuclear energy to move people faster away from those fossil fuels. So I think those two issues is perfect synergy. And I want to do the same thing on political reform, on fiscal responsibility, on the economy, on bridging cultural issues, on immigration, across the board. So that is what drove me to it. I wanted to meet people who had some of that same interest. Not everybody in Braver Angels is that way. Like I said, there are a lot of people in Braver Angels that are, on the extreme, and they don't change their mind, and there's nothing wrong with that. If I could just get them to not hate me, that's a win. But you do meet a disproportionate number of people who are also interested in bridging these policy divides. And that's where, and then those people are like, well, what do I do? And that's where I was like, oh, look at these other organizations that are working on different issues that may be of interest to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for letting us know about Braver Angels, and I'm sure that we will all be checking your website and possibly joining up soon, and we'll be in touch with you about our organization's decisions going forward. But if you want to check us out too, if you already, I don't know if you have already, but we have a lot of stuff on YouTube where we give the same kind of pro-nuclear presentations in different forums, but sometimes they're 10 or 15 minutes, and sometimes they're 30 minutes, and we've met with college groups and town halls and in the city and outside, and so we'd be very happy to appear at an event if you think that that would be helpful in some future scenario or something like that. But we'll definitely talk more.
Actually, one last thing I want to add, that right off what you just said reminded me of this. And this is where I think cross-polarization is helpful. There was a time when I was very skeptical of nuclear energy. I didn't know much about it, and I just thought it was really dangerous, even though I was a Republican. And what happened is there was a talk at a Citizens Climate Lobby conference that I went to about nuclear energy, and that just blew my mind. And I was like, wow, this is interesting stuff. And then I started doing more learning and research about it. So that's the type of thing. I don't know if I would have attended a nuclear energy event on its own, but because I was at this other event, and that's where I'm trying to do. I want you guys to get into these other spaces, because that's where I think you can just really expand your audience. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome.
Do you remember what CCL conference you heard about nuclear power?
Oh gosh, it was before COVID.
Or
what was that?
was it the one in Amherst? Or?
Oh no, it was in DC. They have one every year. Although they stopped for a while during COVID, and I think this is maybe the first in person. I don't think they had one last year. And so the whole idea is that they have this conference, and at the end of the conference, they all go and lobby members of Congress. They actually set up meetings. That's the other thing, by the way, that's great, is you learn from other organizations about best practices. I think because different organizations just do different things well. And Citizens Climate Lobby does a lot of things well, I think. But it's and I don't remember what year it was. It would have probably been 2017, 18, or 19.
Cool.
The other thing
all right.
I want to do, okay, I'll leave it at that.
No, you get that. If you're comfortable, then we got all the time we have here. You keep talking.
Oh, I mean, I love talking about this stuff. I'm also talking to Braver. What I would love Braver Angels to do for the conference next year is to give space to some of these organizations to do, I don't even know to do things that could be more showcase, maybe have breakout sessions where people can go to different rooms and learn about different topics. They don't have that for this year because I think it was they didn't plan for that, but that's one thing I'm hoping to look forward to for future Braver Angel conferences. Again, let these organizations to get more exposure.
That would be cool. Yeah, we've done a lot of live events in different parts of the city where, especially Washington Square Park, we'll have an inflatable polar bear that's kind of goofy, but it attracts attention. And then we have our brochures and people, oh, what is this about? And we talk. But yeah, if we were in a kind of a warehouse expo kind of environment with a million different groups, and people could just walk around and go up to anyone and say, hey, what's your pitch? Let's hear it. Maybe that would be helpful. I'm just spitballing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the type of thing I'm hoping we can do.
Cool.
Let me ask you all a question if we have a little bit of time. What do you find your biggest challenge, obstacle? Like, what do you guys feel like you're struggling with right now? Or maybe nothing, but like, what is your next thing that you want to try to achieve?
Oh man, this is hard. I mean, I guess, I feel like we give these events that, and we are biased. I mean, we are so, bullish on nuclear that we think, why aren't people, agreeing with us? So maybe we could use some of these workshops. But we feel like we talk to people who are the most in the know, who are involved in, energy investing and, politics and engineering and science. And most of these people are very pro-nuclear in our view. Like when we get people who are very, very invested in solving, reducing carbon emissions and shoring up energy efficiency, all of this stuff, But we have not really moved the needle in a big way in New York as far as all of their various climate legislation. I sort of feel like there's a kind of lag, like trickle down effect where, okay, there's first kind of people, for lack of a better term, at the top, like kind of the intellectual influencers. And once they shift, and then you have celebrities shifting, and then you have politicians shifting, then the kind of common man shifts, and only then do things actually shift, like, equalizing subsidies for all zero emission forms like nuclear as well as solar and wind, or enacting a carbon tax instead of subsidies, or something like that.
Eric,
And it hasn't.
I think Eric, I think we
Yes.
actually have had
Cut
some
me off, please.
experience that gives a quite interesting answer to this question. I think due to our non-partisan or anti-partisan position, we have less access to politicians, to decision makers. We have the feeling that groups that are clearly positioning themselves on one side of the spectrum have excellent access to get meetings and reach out to assembly members, senators in the state, like key people for us, or even in the administration. Like, as long as you're on the right party side, they understand you're not a threat to them, you speak the same language, you align with all the other issues, and they talk to you. When we had one of our first meetings with assembly members, they both said, it was a 2-4 meeting, they both said, well, we've never spoken to any environmental group that was pro-nuclear. That was explainable because we were not, this was early, like 3 years ago. So maybe there were not that many pro-nuclear environmental groups, but I think they mentioned they haven't spoken to pro-nuclear people, period. Like, nobody ever spoke to them pro-nuclear. They speak to environmentalists, and all these environmentalists are part of their spectrum. And as Democrats, their spectrum had environmental groups that were then also anti-nuclear. And when they brought their environmental talking points, in passing, they said, yeah, nuclear is bad. And that was basically it. That covered nuclear. Everybody knew what was meant by that. And the other point, we have met a group, startup, very conservative, and they have excellent access to decision makers that are Republican. I don't think they have good access to Democrats, but at least they have always decision makers that they can talk to. We, in theory, could talk to both sides, but we talk to none, pretty much. And that is, if you can find a way for us to break this invisible wall, that would be, I think that would solve a big problem for us. I think that is one of our key issues right now.
Do you think, so that surprises me, because I would think politicians would want to talk to people who could be a swing voter, right? But do you think it might be, and I don't know the answer to this, because of gerrymandering, where politicians are more worried about a primary challenge? So they're trying to, like, they only care about their own party because they know once they win their nomination, they're going to win the general election on either side. And that's why they have no interest in talking to people who are not in their party. Because you would think they would want to talk to swing voters, right? Unless there is no swing voter because they're in a safe district. That
I mean, we wouldn't,
primary.
We're not necessarily talking. So I have failed to talk to my senator and my assembly members. I mean, there was a switch in my district about energy. They just don't respond. And they're both Democrats, have a strong Democratic district. They just are not interested in hearing my talking points or our talking points. We are in touch with Republican assembly members because we're being perceived as kind of against the mainstream energy climate politics of the state. And that's why we're probably being perceived as aligning more with the opposition to that. And that makes it easier to talk to folks in the opposition. But the primary stuff always plays a role, I'm sure, always. But I think it's more. I think it's the common language, the value alignment across the board. Like, people are very comfortable with like think Sierra Club bringing in NRDC, like they speak that left side language of social justice, environmental justice, and all these side issues. They bring them together and they say, yeah, we're here on the same side. We're one family fighting together. And they get easy conversations on the left side, but probably not on the right side, right? But we have to break that. I think that's really important.
This is yeah, just to pivot off that, Dietmar's right that we complained a lot about legacy groups, and just the fact is that Greenpeace and Sierra Club and NRDC and Friends of the Earth and Ralph Nader and Bernie Sanders, they are all anti-nuclear. So if these are the groups that you look to for authority on, okay, what should my position be, and they're still around, they've been around since the 1970s, then, you know, people will, I guess, default for that. So that's also the question about the generational gap. If, you know, young people don't particularly, you know, prescribe to those figures as authorities. But I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I feel like this might just be more of a marathon than a sprint, and this is our burden to bear. I don't think there's an easy solution, but it's something that we obviously struggle with, and that's why we come together and do our work.
This is really interesting to me because now I don't follow this as closely, obviously, as you all do, but I was under the impression that nuclear was getting a lot of positive momentum. That because I've just seen all these articles saying, "Whoa, there's this growing consensus now about nuclear energy," and you had that movie come out, and it seems like you were getting more traction than almost any other group I know. I mean, in terms of support in the public, I've seen polling data that nuclear is more popular than it's been maybe forever, or at least a really long time. I don't know how much that's being translated into political action. And that's where I was curious.
I mean, I think we're at this kind of pivotal point when we're seeing this change happen as we speak, but it's not over yet. You know, like we still have to, you know, come and displace the legacy groups, or have them change from within. And we hear a lot of kind of whispers, you know, from people who show up, you know, and talk to us or in our circles about, oh, I'm like kind of a lower ranked, you know, younger member of these legacy groups, but I'm like a secret dissident. And so maybe if they become leaders in the next few years, then maybe they'll change their positions.
So do you think it's because the Democratic politicians in New York are following more what these kind of far left groups and organizations are saying versus maybe even the majority of their constituents who are not as organized and as passionate? Is that?
Yeah, I think that is what's going on. And I apologize. I've been struggling to try to make my internet connection work here for the last half an hour. I'm missing some of this conversation. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. It looks for a moment. So yeah, I think that, I mean, I think at the congressional, at the national level, there are changes that are happening in terms of Democrats, especially becoming more comfortable with nuclear, but that hasn't translated to the state level yet. At least not in New York. I mean, New York is a ultra blue state, so it's going to be driven more by the far left of the Democratic Party, I think, and so it is. That makes it particularly challenging, I think, for us. But you know, I think it's like somebody just said that I think Erik, you just said it, that it's who's loudest within the particular party that is perceived as being the most representative of the party, even if they're not.
It's a tough nut to crack.
Did that get through? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
How was it?
Yes.
We're just thinking about what you said. But yeah, this is tough. I mean, this is what we struggle with, and we wonder, should we do more kind of like short attention span influencer TikTok types of things, or should we, do what we can more on college campuses, or should we really aggressively reach out to, political staffers and, younger campaigns and primaries, swing counties, as you mentioned, like, far upstate is Republican and the city's, Democrat, but in like mid-state Hudson Valley region, Catskills, there's a lot of opportunities, I think. But yeah, it's hard. I don't know.
Yeah, so that interests me because that is what I hear from a lot of different organizations, that it's often these very vocal minorities that have a lot of power in our political system, which is why I think the political reform one is so popular, because it's trying to break that dynamic.
Yeah. And I think,
Hello?
there's a lot of conspiracies about the legacy groups. Oh, follow the money and big oil funds all of them. And that, I kind of don't buy that thesis. I more just think that change takes a while to actually happen. And energy policy is complicated. And the discussion about climate change and predictions, the severity of predictions, all of these things, are confusing to people, and people have trouble with risk assessment.
Yeah, I read this book when I was just initially learning about climate change in 2016. I read this book, I think it was called Climate Myths, and it was how to debate with a climate skeptic. But the guy obviously did not have any conservative friends, or had never actually spoken with a climate skeptic. And at the end of the book, all he does is follow the money to various think tanks. And, I go into conservative spaces on Facebook and debate with people, and climate skeptics on the right are naturally occurring. They, because, well, for one thing, conservatives and environmentalists just can't stand each other. And so
that's why we need braver angels.
Yeah.
That's effective polarization.
Well, I've gone to normal.
Literally, that is.
I've gone to normal environmental meetings like 350.org, and they're the eco hippies who want to march and wave signs and aren't very technical. And I'm the only one in the room to the right of Elizabeth Warren. And they start to attach all these left-wing agendas to the package. And everybody in the room is to the left of Elizabeth Warren, and I'm keeping my mouth shut. And so you get these packages like the Green New Deal that are full of stuff that's completely irrelevant to the environment, let alone climate. And then conservatives look at these packages and say, well, they obviously aren't sincere. This is ridiculous. They're demanding our complete and total capitulation on everything.
Well, it looks like we should all attend a workshop or two. It looks like we're kind of nearing the end of our time. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't want to keep Erik here all night. He has a beautiful name.
Well, Erik, I have one. I presume you're going to the conference in Gettysburg.
I am.
I'll see you there. I'm registered as well, so I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Is this a Braver's Angels?
Awesome. I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's Braver Angels National Conference, which is the first in-person event of this scale anyway for quite a while.
Oh, how many people do you think will show?
I don't know. I don't keep track of it, but I don't know. I think I saw something about 500, 500 or something like that.
That's the number that was in my head. Yeah.
Cool.
There is a $400 fee, but that includes housing, which they're doing. I guess there's a college there that has a dorm. So that is happening in July 5th through 8th. So if anyone wants to come, talk to Jack, talk to me.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling us about this group, and we would love to have you come to our meetings in general and check us out, and hopefully we can maybe do some work together in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Erik. Take care.
Bye. Great.